Thank you very much. First of all, it's very nice to be part of your conference. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to have the possibility to talk to all of you guys. Of course, I'm sorry I can't speak Hebrew, but I hope your English is good enough to understand me. So before we get started, I'll give you a quick rundown about how I come to be here today, a little bit of my history. Very briefly, when I was a teenager, I started to look at herbal medicine, and I get some very traditional Western European texts. And in this time, it was very interesting for me. They talk about elements, they talk about spirit, they talk about vital energy. And also they use the medicines from animals and minerals, gemstones, coral, pearl, as well as lots and lots of plant medicines. So I became more interested in this, and a few years later, I went and started studying Chinese medicine. And the very first night we had a class in Chinese medicine, they said, okay, you're going to have a lot of new concepts, a lot of new ideas. We're going to talk to you about yin and yang and about elements and using weird medicines from animals and minerals. And very quickly at that time, I realized that the traditional medicine in the West was very, very similar to the traditional medicine in the East. So I studied my Chinese medicine, and I became very interested in Tibetan medicine. And over the years, I studied Tibetan, Ayurvedic medicine. So the first thing I noticed is that these traditions are very similar in many ways. The way they look at the universe, the way they look at the body, the medicines they use, the basic theories and concepts are so remarkably similar that we really can't say they're independent. I like to think of traditional medicine as like one tree with different branches. There's a branch of Ayurveda, a branch of Tibetan, a branch of Chinese, all the different traditions along the Silk Road. So if we have a look, can you guys see the, hang on. I'm trying to give you a picture of the Silk Road. Maybe not. Can you see, Toma? You just see me, my face, is it?
Yeah, just your face.
I'm trying to share an image.
I can see that you're trying to share, but it's black.
Oh, it's all black now, is it?
Right.
Oh, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Sorry. So you can't see my face now?
We can see your face and a black screen.
You have to select the screen that you want to see. Hi, Adam.
Yeah, hello, how are you? I did select the screen, but I'm sorry. Okay, so the point being that along the Silk Road, we have a very, very, very long history of sharing between different cultures. The Silk Road's called the Silk Road because about 2,000 years ago, people started to trade silk. The Chinese came and bought silk, but this avenue was open a lot longer before that. We have the ancient Egyptians using spices, for example. We have, even going back to Sumeria, clear examples of the exchange of knowledge, the exchange of medicine, and the exchange of ideas and sciences from far west to far east. So this began for me a long journey into finding the commonalities between the different traditions. And now this is all encapsulated into medicine traditions, a website that I've started creating about 6 years ago. And medicine traditions brings the theory and the medicines, the materia medica, and also the formulas of traditional medicine into one common ground. So to talk about the theory that the traditional medicines used and the commonality, the common ideas between the different traditions, first of all, we need to talk about the elements, the 4 elements of nature. The 4 elements we had, again, I had some images to show you here, but it seems like I'm not going to be able to show. The 4 elements originally started as a way of understanding the greater universe. So if we go back to very, very ancient times, all around the world, we find that the people worshipped or recognized the sun. We have the sun god. At the same time, they started to realize an opposite of that, and that was the moon. So straight away, we had the sun god and the moon goddess, and this in different forms was worshipped since ancient times. And this is effectively the same as the duality of yin and yang. The yin and yang of Chinese medicine is the same. It's the 2 opposites in the universe, which can be very clearly manifest by the sun and the moon. So for ancient people, what they wanted to do was be able to break up the universe into ways that they could use it, they could work with it, they could understand it. And this wasn't only for medicine, this was philosophy. This went into spirituality, it affected religion, and it affected all the ancient sciences in the ancient world. So originally we had this duality, 2 opposites like sun and moon, summer and winter, hot and cold, fire and water, man and woman. Later on, there was a second pair of opposites, and these are secondary qualities because they're made up of those 2 original qualities. So fire is hot and dry, water is cold and moist. The second 2 qualities were made up of parts of fire and water. So we had earth, it's cold and dry, the coldness from water and the dryness from fire. And then we had air element. Air element is warm and moist. Again, one part of fire, one part of water. This gave us 4 opposites, 4 energetic opposites. We have hot and dry, hot and moist, cold and dry, and cold and moist. Now, straight away, the whole external universe could be divided up into these types of energies. The most obvious for us is the 4 seasons. We have summer and winter, which is fire and water element. And then we have the in-between seasons of spring and autumn. Spring being related to air element and autumn being related to earth element. So in the manifest universe, including even planets, but also different animals, different minerals, and different herbs, they can be said to have one of these 4 qualities. We can have a cold and moist herb, something like a cucumber. Cucumber is one example of a cold and moist food or cold and moist medicine. And we can have something that's hot and dry, like a chili pepper or garlic. So straight away, the whole external universe could be broken up in being understood to being different manifestations of these qualities. So later on, they start to apply this to the internal body, and that's where medicine comes in. We have organs in the body that are more cold and dry. We have organs in the body that are more hot and moist, also with the other qualities. So our bones are classically like earth element. They're cold and dry. When we have something like the liver's warm and moist. So different parts of the body are related to these different qualities. But it's not only different parts of the body, it's also our whole nature. We can have, roughly speaking, 4 different constitutions, 4 different types of people. If we have a hot and dry person, this is someone with a lot of fire. So somebody that likes to have a lot of spicy food, a lot of alcohol, a lot of chili, eat a lot of red meat. They will tend to get angry quickly. They will be very quick thinking and very strong-willed, but also short-tempered, can get angry quickly. And as with the other types of constitutions, If we have a cold and moist person is somebody that would tend to hold on to fluid. They will be sluggish. Their energy is not very good. They're often pale face. Their tongue will be large and flabby and moist, maybe with a white coating. They will fall asleep very quickly. Their energy will be low, and they will never get excited or passionate. This is a classic phlegm type person. So why is this important? This is important because what we're always trying to do is to try and achieve balance in our treatment in traditional medicine. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Unani medicine, Ayurveda, Tibetan, Chinese, the traditional Greek medicine, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. What we're always trying to do is find some balance. So if we take something like asthma, for example, asthma, we can have 3 or 4 very clearly different types of asthma. And these all fit very perfectly with the 4 natures that I described to you earlier. It can be a hot and dry, a hot and moist, a cold and dry, or a cold and moist type of asthma. So if somebody has asthma, they have trouble breathing, and as they breathe, you can hear the phlegm in their throat. You can hear the gurgle from the phlegm in their throat as they breathe. They always cough up a lot of phlegm. Their face again is pale. Their energy is low. They get worse in cold weather, but maybe get better when they do some exercise. That's a classic cold type asthma or phlegm type asthma. In this type, we don't need to use asthma medicines. What we need to do is use medicines to clean the phlegm. Conversely, we can have a hot type asthma. This will be inflammatory asthma. Inflammation is related for us to heat. So the person will have heat symptoms. They'll have like a red tongue, a fast pulse, maybe their face is red. They're very active. If they do more work or the weather's hot or they eat too much hot food, their asthma can get worse. So these are the same disease. Biomedically, they're the same disease. They're both diagnosed as asthma, and yet the cause of them is remarkably different, and therefore the medicines we will use to treat them will also be remarkably different. How is this different to modern natural medicine? In modern herbal medicine, if somebody wants to treat asthma, they might pick 4 herbs that have all been proven to be good for asthma. They put them all together and they say that's the treatment of asthma. But in this way, we're not treating the nature of the body. And this is the key difference, is understanding the nature of the body. Now, this knowledge is consistent throughout the different traditions. The different traditions will always treat different diseases according to their nature. Even if we just break it into a hot type and a cold type, that is often enough to start working towards a successful treatment. Also, if you read traditional medicine books, if you study traditional medicine, you will often see that there can be a large number of herbs that will be suitable for one type of disease. So you might even find people in traditional books talking about ginger or chili being good for asthma. And then they do the research on it and they say, no, it didn't work. It wasn't very effective. But what happens is maybe we have 10% of asthma patients have the very cold type asthma. And in the cold type asthma, these hot medicines like chili and ginger may be very, very effective for them, but in other types, they're not effective. So this is another problem with the research for traditional medicine. If we're doing scientific research, what people want to do is they want to find this disease called asthma, which medicines can we use? And they won't tend to do the differential diagnosis. So differential diagnosis is very, very, very important in traditional medicine. So when we have these natures, we can call a fire nature, a water nature, an earth nature, and an air nature. These natures, these qualities can be specific to one organ, or they can be also the whole body. So for example, as I said before, we can have somebody that has a hot nature, and everything about their body and the way it runs, we can see they have a more hot nature. As I said, they might have a short temper. They don't need to sleep very long. Their mind is always active. They have a strong body. They're always willing to work, but they can get frustrated if people aren't quick to join them. Those types of bodies will be prone to more inflammation, more inflammatory or heat type diseases. So we can have an imbalance in one organ, or we can have an imbalance in the whole body. That's the first thing to know. When we get to more complex ways of treatment, we can see that we could have a cold body, but they have a heat condition in the lungs, for example. And this is where we get to more complicated herbal formulas that might use warming medicines to warm up the cold body, but also medicines that clear heat from the lungs specifically. So this is a good example of how traditional medicine looks to treat what's happening in the individual body. And sure, we have formulas that are famous for using for asthma, and some of those formulas may be good for a lot of different types of asthma. But in general, the treatment will be very, very different for the different types of imbalance that we see in the person. So this nature, when we have what we call a constitution, again, we can have 4 main types of constitution. And this constitution comes from 2 different things. It's partly related to our DNA, our genetics. We get it from our family. So we can see that the certain types of nature often run through a family. If we have mother is very big, holds on to a lot of weight, has a sluggish energy, very often the children, or maybe specifically the daughters, may follow that type of build. So we obviously get a lot from our parents, and we know this in Western medicine as well. Traditional medicine also says the same thing. We have part of our constitution we inherit from our parents, but we also have part of our constitution that goes based on our diet and our lifestyle. And this is where traditional medicine can really shine, where we can get a lot of benefit from traditional medicine, is understanding that fundamental basis of the type of body. So if somebody has, again, a heat type body, one of the interesting things you see is somebody that has a heat type body often wants to have a lot more hot food. So somebody with a really strong constitution, like a strong man, for example, is always aggressive, always very strong, can get angry quickly. They're often the ones that love to eat a lot of meat. They drink more. They like to go out and maybe party. They have a very big appetite, so they eat lots more. All of these things will pour petrol on the fire. They will increase the heat in their body. Conversely, the opposite type, again, the cold phlegm type person, they're often the ones that have a sweet tooth. They love to eat a lot of sweet foods. They often like cold foods. They often like ice cream and cold milky drinks, things like that. Their metabolism is low, so they tend to want to sleep more. All of these things will make their metabolism lower, and it will feed their cold nature. So often in clinic, what we've got to do is correct the imbalance. That is, first of all, before we do any treatment, we must look at the nature of the individual body and stop the person feeding that nature. In my clinic, I have a mantra that I always tell people. It's silly to treat the problem if you're still feeding the problem. And if somebody comes to you with a chronic disease, nearly always they must be actively feeding their problem. So at the very, very, very start, what we got to do is look at diet and lifestyle advice. And this should be before we even look at giving medicine or treatment. So again, if somebody somebody's always fatigued, always has low energy, they have they need to sleep a lot. Their mind is foggy, not clear. They can't think clearly. Their motivation is always very low. Often in this case, if their body's like that, they can get anxiety very easily because their energy is not good enough to be able to put up with day-to-day normal stresses. So in this type of thing, the first thing we've got to do is stop feeding the nature of that body. We have to tell the person, don't sleep too much. The first thing is maximum 7 or 8 hours a day for that person is enough. After that, they need to get up and do exercise. They need to turn on the fire of the body. Secondly, they can't have yogurt and fresh fruit for breakfast. They should have something warm or cooked. They should try and not eat between meals, only have set meals. And their food should be cooked. They should use more spicy foods, more herbs and spices in their cooking, and also not overeat. So all of these are classic examples used in all the different systems. I've traveled a lot studying traditional medicine, and these basic things you can find consistent throughout the different systems. And so that brings me to another thing. One of the really interesting things with traditional medicine, start to learn traditional medicine, and at the very, very first night, the first day of your treatment, you're learning. You're taught about hot and cold. You're taught that some people are hot, they'll have a red face, a fast pulse, a red tongue, get angry easy, don't need to sleep much. And some people are cold. They feel the cold, their face is pale, their energy is low, their voice will be very soft. And they're the person that sits quietly in the corner and doesn't say much. These are classic ways of dividing people into hot and cold types. Straight away, if you understand this from the very first day of treatment of your education, your learning, you know that a ginger tea or some cinnamon or a spiced tea will be good for the cold person, versus a cooling medicine like peppermint tea, for example, will be better for the hot person. And so this is one of the interesting things with traditional medicine. Even from the very, very start, once you understand the idea of hot and cold, this straight away means that you can start to help the person just by telling them what not to have and what to have. So this is hopefully making it clear the differences between the emphasis on treatment from traditional medicine versus modern medicine, modern herbal medicine, and naturopathy. The next thing that's interesting is when we have these four humors in the body, that they are both physiological and also pathological. That means they are both good for the body when they're in balance, but they're also pathological. They cause disease when they're out of balance. If we look today, a lot of the modern natural medicine is looking at things from outside. It's looking at toxins in the environment, or climate change, or the water is not good, or things like that. And they're trying to blame these things, but not blaming them for the one reason that causes most of these things, which is diet and digestion. So this is, again, a very, very, very ancient part of all the traditional medicines, that everything starts with the stomach. Maybe all of you have heard of Hippocrates. Hippocrates, the Greek father of medicine, they called him. 2,400 years ago, Hippocrates lived to nearly 100 years old. And he didn't actually write much, but what he did is he compiled a lot of very old knowledge, and he put it in a form to systematize it. And the writings of Hippocrates for 2,400 years continued to be a major impact in Western herbal medicine. So at this time, they realized that we have these energies in our body, and that the same thing that can be feeding our body and making our body stronger and keeping our body younger, those same things, if they're not in balance, can also cause disease. So the balance of the four elements is literally an equal-armed cross. And this is suggesting the balance of the four energies in the body. So when somebody has an imbalance, that cross is no longer balanced. It's out of balance. One of the four is overactive. And so this is the very crux of all traditional medicine. Stop feeding the imbalance and then treat the imbalance. So going back to our constitution is partly related, obviously, to our DNA from our parents, but very, very largely related to the food that we eat. And so straight away, we can see that a lot of the foods we eat can be called hot or cold. If we have a spicy food, if we have something with lots of garlic, or something with lots of cinnamon or spices in it, or something with a lot of chili in it, straight away, everyone around the world will have no problem in saying, it's hot. We understand this idea that food can be hot. Exactly the same with medicine. Also, if it's a very hot day, we all understand that watermelon or an ice cream, an icy pole, a cold can of drink is obviously cool. We desire it because we're feeling hot. So these types of energies are always what we're trying to do. And the same thing with our medicine, with our formulas. When we compose a formula, what we'll be doing is looking at the nature of the body and the nature of the disease. So again, somebody could have a cold body, but have too much heat in the lungs or too much heat in the throat. We can combine warm herbs that support the heat of the body with some cold medicine that treats the throat imbalance, for example. So based on this idea, it was Hippocrates 2,400 years ago that first said all disease begins in the stomach. I was in my teens when I first read this. As a teenager, I read this thing, all disease begins in the stomach. And I can still remember having a little bit of a laugh, thinking that for the old people, ancient people a long time ago, everything was very simplistic. But of course, the longer we're in clinical practice and the more we're learning about the gut biome, and how the balance of good and bad bacteria in our body is so important, we're learning that this is actually really true. All disease does begin in the stomach. So there's two parts. I already mentioned about not feeding the same nature. If somebody's too cold, we must stop the cold food going in. And if somebody's too hot, we must cut back on heating food. But the other really big part is the quality of digestion. And that is how well our stomach is digesting. One of the really big problems I see with a lot of modern herbal medicine practitioners is they automatically assume that if you give herbs or supplements or change the diet, that automatically it's going to be digested in the stomach. If we accept all disease begins in the stomach, and if somebody has come to you sick, then you can straight away say probably their digestion is not working properly. Yes, it makes sense. So this is the other big part, is focusing very strongly on the stomach and on digestion. And traditional medicine, again, throughout all the systems along the Silk Road, spends a huge amount of importance, puts a lot of importance on making sure the digestion is good. This will affect us in different ways. Somebody could have, somebody can have almost any disease, and you can find that their stomach is not working properly. This means that treating their body can be treating, a big part of it can be treating their digestion, even if you're not treating the problem they came to you with. Again, somebody presents with asthma and they have lots of phlegm, and the phlegm is giving them asthma. If we look at them and we see that their digestion is weak, they have a pale, thick coating on the tongue, They say, oh no, I don't have a good appetite and I feel nausea quickly. What's happening in this person is the digestion is not working properly. And the indigestion, the poor digestion, is creating more mucus in the body. So when it's creating more mucus in the body, it will feed the mucus disease, and it will, again, be one of the major things feeding their asthma, causing their asthma. So when it's like this, taking great care to make sure that the digestion is working properly based on the nature of the person's presenting symptoms. Again, working out whether there's heat or cold or dryness or moisture in the body is actually very, very, very logical. Once you understand the diagnostic parameters of this, you'll see it's actually very logical. When we have somebody that has a skin condition, somebody comes in with eczema, we can have a hot type eczema, a cold type eczema, a dry type eczema, or a moist type eczema. And each one of these will need to be treated totally differently. But one of the things we must do is stop feeding the nature through the digestion. So again, if somebody has very hot, red, itchy skin, they're always itching their skin, the skin is very red, it's dry, maybe it bleeds easily, and it's always itchy. This person has too much heat and dryness in their body, and any food that aggravates or feeds heat and dryness, puts too much heat in the blood, things like alcohol, things like spicy food, and also lots of salt, for example, that might dry the body out. These things are going to irritate and aggravate their condition. So you can give them the herbs that have been proven to be very good for eczema, and yet you see that their problem is still staying or it comes back. And this is because we haven't dealt with the fundamental problem, what's happening with the digestion. So traditional medicine, again, in all traditions, and for well over 2,000 years, in some cases closer to 3,000 years or longer, the traditional medicine puts a huge amount of emphasis on making sure that the digestion is good. One of the interesting things the ancient philosophers, the ancient doctors said, and I quote, "It's better to have good digestion with a very poor quality diet than to have a very, very good diet, but to have poor digestion." And one of the things we see quite often in the modern practice, people that are very, very health conscious, people that are trying to be healthy all the time, what we can see them doing is doing things to make their digestion worse. So a lot of people that are trying to be very healthy have a lot of raw food. They eat lots and lots of raw food, and they eat little snacks through the day. They have a handful of nuts and then some fresh fruit, and they're constantly eating. So having lots of raw food and eating lots of small meals through the day, these are classic things that can disorder our digestion. They can make our digestion worse. So another big part of today, and probably that's the last topic we'll talk about for today, is trying to make sure that people are looking after their digestion. They're honoring their digestion. The first thing is to make sure you eat, and then don't eat anything for a few hours after. This thing of grazing, just eating little bits throughout the day, is really, really, really not good. The old masters again said it's very, very bad to put new food on top of half digested food. So if we've eaten something and it's sitting in our stomach, it's half digested, and then you put more food on, and then you put more food on, these are going to ferment. They're going to cause toxins in the body, even if the food was very, very good. So to honor the digestion is to give the stomach something and then don't eat anything for a while after. The stomach likes regularity. Our stomach really likes regularity. It likes a morning time when we have breakfast, a midday time when we eat lunch, and then a similar time we eat dinner. The stomach would also prefer for our food to be relatively repetitive, relatively boring. So in ancient times, if we grow up in an area, at this time, I'm in Australia, so we say in Australia at this time, this food, we have a lot of this food. Everybody eats that food. 3 months later, in a different season, then we have a lot of another food. This is typical of all humanity throughout history, and it's only in modern times where we can say, tonight I want Thai food, tomorrow night I'm going to have Indian, I think I'm going to have a hamburger on Friday night. We mix and match our diets so very, very, very differently to what all humans have done all throughout history. So if you can do this and you feel healthy and your stomach likes it, that's okay. But when you have somebody that has a chronic disease, has serious digestive problems, and if we believe the idea that in some way all disease can be taken back to the stomach and our digestion, in these cases, we must really regiment the way people eat. Eat food and then don't eat. Chew your food very, very, very well. The old masters used to say, chew once for every tooth. We have 32 adult teeth. This means chew once for every tooth. Every mouthful, chew 32 times. My professor was an old master. The professor of Chinese medicine that taught me was a very old master. When I learned from him, he was already in his 80s. And he passed away a few years ago. He was well over 100. So he used to tell people, chew each mouthful 32 times. In the first week of our Chinese medicine education, he told us all for 1 week, chew every mouthful 32 times. I went home and I did it religiously for 1 week. I chewed everything 32 times. Didn't matter if it was steak or yogurt, I chewed everything 32 times. And for many years after that, that really impacted the way I eat. It made me eat more, chew more and eat less. When we don't chew our food enough, we eat too quickly and then we eat too much. So if we imagine the stomach, if we've overloaded the stomach, maybe the first half of it gets digested and the second half sits there and ferments and turns into nasty things again. With the 4 humours I talked about earlier, the 4 elements in our body, the 4 humours, blood, bile, phlegm, and melancholy. The nastiest one, the very bad one, that's responsible for most of our worst diseases is what they would call melancholy. And melancholy is actually very similar to the idea of damp in Chinese medicine. That is, it's the residue left from undigested food. So when we eat something and it's not digested properly, the residue, if it makes it into our blood, some of that residue is responsible for some of the nastiest diseases that we can have. 2,400 years ago, the ancient Greeks already said that cancer, the main cause of cancer, was melancholy. In other words, the toxic residue of undigested food. When it builds up in our body, it obstructs the body, it obstructs the immune system, it obstructs the flow of qi and blood. And this causes areas of stagnation. And that area of stagnation is eventually what can turn into fibroid tumors, other types of tumors, and also cancer. So this is a very, very important idea that as well as treating the nature of the body, if someone's too hot, help to make them more cool. If somebody's too cold, help to warm them up. But the other really important part is making sure the digestion is good. And this is where things like fasting comes in. It's interesting that a lot of religions and a lot of traditional people, spiritual people, have relied on fasting. And fasting is a way of making sure our digestive system gets a really, really good cleanse. It has a rest. It's not being fed every day. This allows it to take a break, get its full energy up so that when we eat, our food is being digested properly. Unfortunately, a lot of adults don't actually have a good appetite. We think we have a good appetite because it's time to eat, but we don't actually have a good appetite. So if from today's talk, if you can get one thing out of it, I think it's to put more emphasis on digestion, put more emphasis on making sure the digestive process is good, and also that you're telling your patients to feed the nature that is opposite to their nature. Again, somebody's too hot and dry, give them more cooling, moistening foods. So another example, when we have the arthritis problem, people come with the arthritis. If we have the very, very bad arthritis, the rheumatoid arthritis, often in these cases, what we actually have is not one thing out of balance, but 2 or 3 things out of balance. So the different natures I talked to you about earlier, the humours of the body, these are actually, the humours are actually things that go to make up our blood. So one way we can show the humours is if we take a glass of blood and we let the glass of blood sit for 24 hours, we will see 4 layers of blood separate. On top, we have some fat. This is related to the bile humor. We have the clear part, the plasma. That's related to the phlegm humor. Then we have the red part sitting in the test tube or the glass. The red part is the hemoglobin, and that's what we call blood humor. And at the very bottom of the glass will be some sediment or ash. And that sediment or ash, the gray or black part in the blood, this is related to the melancholy. So the humoral idea, this basic humoral idea that our food feeds our body and the food creates these 4 different parts of our blood, the 4 humours. This is again consistent through all the different traditions, so much so that we can say it's not a coincidence. At some stage, this knowledge has moved along and been shared since very, very, very ancient times. And it's a consistency that you can see is very, very different with traditional medicine when we compare it with modern herbal medicine or modern Western medicine, allopathic medicine. How are we going for time, Toma?
We're fine. We have 15 more minutes. You want to try to
Beautiful.
bring up your presentation? Or are you giving up on
Sorry?
it? You want to try to bring up your...
Yeah. Look, I just had some screenshots I was going to share with you, but they were just things that I was going to bring up as I've done the talk. So that's okay. We can continue.
All right.
So to wrap this up, the reason traditional medicine is so important for us today and has so much to offer is because it's the only true way that we can treat what's happening in the body. We can understand what's happening in the body individually, not treat everyone with one disease with the same herbs or formula, but to treat an individual body according to what that body needs. And this brings me to probably the last really important point is formulas. When people study naturopathy or modern herbal medicine, there's no traditional formulas that they will use, that you will learn. You learn about combinations of herbs that are well known to work together, but you don't learn about the way to use this formula in an ancient, the way to use this herb, rather, in an ancient formula that's been time tested for a long time. So in all the traditions along the Silk Road, it's common to have formulas that have been used for 2,000 years. Now think about it. If we have a formula, a herbal formula has been used for 2,000 years, number one, it has to show efficacy. It has to show that that formula works. Number two, it has to show that that combination of medicines is a successful combination of medicines. Traditional medicine never uses one herb by itself. We always have elaborate formulas. And the formulas are not just 4 herbs that all work for asthma put together. What we're doing is having a tailored formula that will treat the presenting conditions, treat the underlying pathology, and maybe have some things in that formula that are helping to make those other herbs work better. So the study of traditional formulas is a really, really, really beautiful thing. And if you're serious about herbal medicine, I thoroughly, thoroughly recommend to try and learn to use some of the herbs you like using, but from traditional formulas. The traditional formulas, again, time-tested. There's a huge amount of research being done, especially in China, but also in India, and also throughout the Middle East. I only recently became aware that there's a huge amount of traditional medicine in Iran. The Iranians are doing a lot of research and using their own traditional medicine in their hospitals as well. So right along the Silk Road, traditional medicine is being taken into modern science. There's been clinical trials and tests proving that these medicines work. And again, when we have a combination of herbs that have been used for a great deal of time, this proves that they have some efficacy and that it's a successful unit of herbs come together. The overwhelming amount of herbs from herbal formulas from Chinese medicine are many, many centuries old, often 2,000 years old. And we can see exactly the same thing with Tibetan, Ayurveda, and through to Unani medicine. So Unani medicine is very interesting. Unani actually means Arabic. It means Greek in Arabic. So the word Unani literally means Greek, and that's because the Greek medicine came to the Arabs and Persians around about 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years ago, I think they call like the Arab Golden Age or something like this. This is when, for the Arabs and Persians, they were very studious. The Arab doctors studied Greek medicine. They translated a lot of things into Arabic and Persian. They also brought in Indian medicine. They translated a lot of Indian texts and brought a lot of Indian medicines in. Plus, they had their own very, very old medicine going back to ancient Persia. You can say even to Mesopotamia. So at this time, all of this was condensed into one single body of knowledge. And this is what became known as Unani medicine. But the interesting thing is, about 1,000 years ago, this knowledge was taken from the Arabs. It was translated into Latin. And a lot of this writing was the main medical teaching used for the next 800 years all throughout Europe. So this, I mention this because this is very relative to where you guys are. A lot of the medicines that are available from the Middle East, and a lot of the formulas that have also been used are formulas that have actually come from the marrying together of different traditions. So this idea that there's Arabic medicine, Indian medicine, Tibet, Chinese medicine, European medicine, it's actually not like that. We can see already from history that there's been a continual crossflow, a continual passing on and sharing of knowledge, a continual giving of knowledge and taking of knowledge and incorporating it into different cultures. And then often centuries later, that culture is also then giving back to the original culture. So literally we can see it leapfrogging backwards and forwards from over many, many, many centuries, actually over thousands of years. And this is again showing that the fundamental theories, the fundamental materia medica, and even a lot of the basic ideas and the formulas and treatment used in traditional medicine is so homogeneous. It comes together very, very well. So I hope some of what I've talked to you about today can inspire you. No matter what you're trained in, if you're a Chinese medicine practitioner, if you've studied another tradition, Indian or Tibetan medicine, or if you're a modern practitioner, you're a naturopath or a modern herbal medicine practitioner, once you have an understanding of herbal medicine, there's nothing to stop you starting to incorporate some things from traditional medicine into your clinic. And this is exactly why Medicine Traditions has been formed. It's to give a framework where people can, no matter what your background is, can have access to the knowledge, the materia medica and formulas from other systems, and to incorporate them together. One of the fascinating things is that a lot of the herbs, if we look at a herb like licorice root, gansao in Chinese, licorice root, of course, has been used in all systems for a very, very, very long time. In fact, who used licorice first as a medicine is quite hard to work out. It goes back in all traditions so long. But the interesting thing is the overwhelming use of licorice in medicine is so, so similar. There's two main things. Is obviously for the lungs. Everybody knows licorice is good for the lungs, for cough, for asthma, bronchitis, but also as an energy tonic in formulas that will increase the energy, help people's digestion work better, things like that. And licorice can be seen used in all different traditions for these two purposes. But when you look at the different traditions, they might combine different herbs together with licorice. So in India, they'll often put spices, have cardamom or black pepper or ginger with licorice for lung problems. Chinese medicine will use a different group of medicines. And so this means if you want to learn how to use licorice really well, you can often expand the way you use it and increase your clinical efficacy by looking how licorice has been used in different systems. And again, that's the whole idea of why we started Medicine Traditions, to have one common base where if you're learning about how to treat a specific condition, you can see how Tibetans would treat it, Chinese would treat it, Indians would treat it, and then you can come up with your own formula. This is something I've been doing in my clinical practice for probably 20 years now, which is I very rarely use a Chinese formula by itself. What I'll often do is get inspiration from different traditions. If I know I want to use licorice, I'll look at how licorice has been used in other systems. And so in our Medicine Traditions website, we have around 5,000 traditional herbal combinations and traditional formula. It's 5,000 formulas and combinations collected from some of the greatest minds in the history of medicine, all in one organized place. So what we're hoping to encourage modern Western practitioners to do is to be able to expand their clinical efficacy by looking and learning from some of the ancient masters, because I see a lot of people who write books for modern herbal medicine, and very few of them can write a good formula if we compare it to the beautiful formulas from our great traditions. I know Toma studied Chinese medicine, and for anyone that's studied a tradition, a medicine tradition, and have access to these beautiful formulas that have been used for so long, really modern practitioners are missing on how to be able to write a good formula. So I think we can probably wrap it up for today. The last thing I'll show you, anybody, this is where I do some shameless plugging. If anyone's interested, we have the Medicine Traditions formulas book of formula. This is available on our website. This is a book full of the main formulas used in the Western tradition. When I say the Western tradition, this is including all through the Middle East. So a lot of the formulas will be herbs that have been used, herbs and formulas that are endemic to the region you're living in now. And this is another great way to have access to be able to expand perhaps herbs that you have, herbs that you have access to, local herbs that grow where you are, but learn how to put them in fantastic formulas. So how are we going? 10 past. So I think we'll wrap it up for today. I hope that's been useful to some of you. I hope there's something that can be of use to you. It's always a little bit hard when you have some people that are traditional medicine and some people are modern medicine practitioners. So I hope I've been able to give you an overview in an hour. Of course, we just do a brief overview of the picture. I hope it's helped to give you some more idea of traditional medicine. I'd like to say thank you very much for Toma for contacting me and inviting me to be part of your conference, and I hope the rest of it goes very well.
Thank you, Adam. It was very interesting. You have time for some questions?
Yeah, sure. If anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer some questions.
Okay, there's a question. If you can say a few things about your website, if maybe there's a teaching or courses online. Okay.
So the Medicine Traditions website has about 3,000 pages. There's close to 1,500 materia medica. So we have a complete list of plant medicines used in Chinese, Tibetan, Indian, and Unani and European medicine. So again, a lot of the medicines, I spoke to Toma before, and he's very interested in using local medicines that are available to you in Israel, medicines that grow locally. And a lot of these medicines, a lot of this information is available on Medicine Traditions. So there's about 1,500 materia medica, and that's including all the minerals, a lot of animal products, and of course, mostly herbs. And then the other part is, as I said, about 5,000 traditional combinations, herbal combinations and formulas used in the different systems. We have about 1,200 pages just on main formulas. That means formulas that have been widely used, and there's a page for each of those major formulas, but then there's many thousands of extra combinations collected from different things. So at the moment, the Medicine Traditions is largely a database. Hopefully this year, depending on what happens with the COVID excitement, but hopefully this year we'll get more into doing some courses. But at the moment, Medicine Traditions is a subscription service. There's a lot of free information for people that are interested, but for practitioners that want to take it further, there's a subscription to Medicine Traditions. Normally we have a subscription, it's $195 for a year. At the moment we have a special, which I kept going just for the talk we had today. At the moment it's $95. So it's $95 for a 1-year subscription. You have access to 3,000 pages, compiling a lot of the greatest medical texts in history into one organized, workable format. So I hope that gives you a bit of a rundown. Whoever asked the question, thank you for asking the question. I hope that gives you an idea, an introduction. But medicinetraditions.com is the website URL. And if you go there and have a look around, you'll be able to have a look and see some of the things that it's offering. Is there any other question?
Thank you. Someone is trying to talk.
Sorry.
Okay.
Hi, Adam. How are you? Thank you so much for the lecture. It was super interesting.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask, do you have a link? I'm on the website on Medicine Traditions. Do you have a link or a coupon code or something like that for us in order to get that discount? Is that something that, Tomil, you're going to send us?
We posted it also here in the chat and also on the website.
All right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, thank you for that. If you go to the home page, it's Medicine Traditions with S on the end, traditions.com, medicinetraditions.com, one word. If you go to the website, at the very top of the page, there's a little red box saying Happy 2021. If you click on that, that'll take you straight to the payment, and there's no coupon code. The discount will be active for another 2 days. So if anyone's interested, it's supporting our work. It's tax deductible if you're a practitioner, and it gives you an enormous amount of information, that's a lot of which is very hard to get. It's not in print. That's also on the same page, the home page. At the bottom of the page, you'll see the book also available. And again, the information in this book is largely unavailable in English. You have to go back to very old Latin texts to get this information. So we spent a long time translating a lot of this from old texts and making it, publishing it today, so it's more widely available to people who can't speak Latin. Was there any other questions before we wind up?
There's another question. You can read it in the chat, or do you want me to read it out loud?
Yeah.
How do you treat or see mixed symptoms, like someone who is cold and moist in nature and heat in the stomach?
Right, that's a very, very good question. Of course, when we do an introduction talk today, it's talking about sort of the overall picture with the humoral idea, that is phlegm, bile, melancholy, and blood, these four humors. Of course, it can get very complicated. I also mentioned before, you can have a constitution. You could have somebody that's got a cold constitution, but they have heat in the lungs. Now, for example, that type of person, they will probably be a big person. They will hold on to fluid or weight. Their energy is generally sluggish. They will feel the cold. They will always feel the cold. A hot-natured person will tend to not like the heat, and a cold-natured person will tend to not like the cold. So if somebody's like that, they show all the signs of coldness and phlegm, a phlegm-type nature. But they have a dry cough, it's irritable, they have a sore throat, and when they cough up, they cough yellow mucus. This would be somebody that's a cold-natured body, but they have heat in the lungs. So if we're really honest, once somebody's an adult, once somebody's in their 40s or 50s or 60s, really the diagnosis can sometimes, if you're being very particular, it can get very complicated, because they might have one thing happening with the kidneys, they may have one thing happening with the lungs, their digestion may be a different way. But we always must work on why the person came to see us. So if somebody came with a cough, we must treat this first. And also then, constitutional treatment. After the cough is gone, we can look to how to support their constitution. So you might tell them, once the cough is gone, hopefully after a few days or a week, the cough is settled, you can tell them to perhaps come back and work on their constitution, because their constitution is a cold, damp type. You can talk to them about having more warm foods, staying away from cold, raw foods, and perhaps giving them herbs. So the mixed things can get more complicated. And this is another good point to mention. When we have a very complicated disease, let's talk about cancer. Cancer, we never normally have just one thing happening. Cancer, we have a number of things happening at once. And this is why the ancient masters said in a very complex disease, the diseases that are very hard to treat often it's because there's a mixed nature together. You might have damp and wind and heat all mixed together, for example. And certainly some cases of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, we can have damp, heat, and perhaps wind all attacking the body together. And this is where formulas are very, very important, because if you use a hot medicine to clear the damp, you can aggravate the heat. If you use a cold medicine to clear the heat, it can aggravate the damp. So when somebody has a mixed nature, something more complicated happening, this is where using very specific traditional formulas are very, very useful, because the nature of it can be quite complicated. Thank you for that question. That was a good question. This is another very good question. Modern herb extracts. Right here in front of me, I have one of our herbal extracts. These are now used in Chinese medicine very commonly. You can see these are like granules. So this is a dried herb extract. It's a 10-to-1 extract, and these have become very, very, very popular in Chinese medicine. Toma, do you use these?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think everywhere in everyone who uses Chinese medicine, the extracts have become very popular. I personally prefer to use raw herbs. I use extracts for certain things, but I much prefer to use raw herbs. I believe if we use herbs how nature gave them to us, then they're often working more effectively. That's a very broad statement. There's certainly great reasons to use extracts, and extracts can be very good for some things. But in my clinic, I mainly use tea. I get the herbs to be cooked down like the traditional Chinese way, and I use a lot of powders as well. I think that's another thing. It's really, really good for modern Western practitioners to get used to using powders that you make yourself. Herbal powders are truly, truly, herbal powders are a really, really great way to use herbs. And actually on my website, Medicine Traditions, a great deal of the formulas are in powdered form. And powders are great because we use small amounts. You can add mineral things like pearl powder or coral powder or all sorts of unusual things. If we want to use saffron is very, very expensive, as you guys know. We can't afford to use it in a tea or even a tincture maybe, but a little bit of saffron going into a powder can be really, really, really good. So my personal thing, I love to use teas and powders. I also use tinctures, herbs and alcohol. I think the extracts are really good, but I do prefer to use raw herbs whenever possible. This is a personal choice. You can also buy a lot of the traditional Chinese formulas. You can buy them made up as extracts. So I think everyone has to see what works best for them. But when we have a formula, a traditional formula, maybe sometimes can have 50 or sometimes 70 or more herbs. And yet the amount they're taking of each of that powdered medicine or the pills is really very, very, very small. If a scientific herbalist looked at it, they'd say, oh, you're not taking enough of any one herb to do anything, and yet these herbs the formulas work really effectively. So I think learning to use some of the traditional formulas, and particularly learning to make your own powders, is a really, really, really great way to start to use a little bit more traditional medicine in your clinic. And seriously, I've used a lot of the traditional formulas that are on my website, on the Medicine Traditions website, and I'm often amazed at how effective they are. If you learn the different sources for the different formulas, you learn some of the very, very good, great doctors who wrote amazing formulas. You can really see that some of these powdered formulas were just a little teaspoon twice a day of powder, and they work remarkably well. If you read modern scientific herbal medicine books, you'd say they can't work because you're not taking enough of any one herb. So that's a very long answer to your question, but thank you very much for asking about the use of herbal extracts. Just as an example, this extract, I use this in my Liu Wei Di Huang Wan. So this is a very, very famous formula with 6 herbs in Chinese medicine. It's our main yin tonic formula. And what I like to do is I make all the other 5 herbs as a powder, and I use some of this in extract. Number 1, because it's the biggest part of the formula. So this is a way to make it more concentrate. And number 2, because this is very hard to powder. So I think it's good to be able to mix. And if we, today we have very high-end extracts. I think it's good if we can use them in our clinic. Hope that answers your question.
All right. Thank you very much, Adam. It was fascinating. We'll have you again over one day.
Thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate the offer to join you today. I hope at least some of your members got something useful from it. Very, very nice to talk with you, and I hope the rest of the day goes well.